So welcome, September 2nd, 2020. We are focusing on the implementation of the integrated core practice model for children, youth, and families today. Let's see, I've got to click in the right spot. You know what, before I click, I'm gonna do a poll question. I'm going to ask all of you to use, to answer this question. Which describes your field of expertise? So let us know where you're coming from. Martha, yes, you're automatically muted. So in the webinar, we're not, participants don't have the ability to talk, but you can use the chat window. So while you answer this polling question, I'm going to give you a little bit of lay of the land for the webinar. You can use the polling, or I'm sorry, you can use the chat window to type in questions. And then you can also use the question and answer feature. Excellent. So it looks like I'm going to end the polling and share the results so that everybody can see. Look at this. We've got a majority, 28% from behavioral health, 26% child welfare. We've got a big showing of education in the house. We've got probation, regional center, tribes, and then others are popping up in the chat. So the Department of Rehabilitation, vocational rehabilitation, awesome, excellent, excellent. So I'm going to click to our next slide for the agenda. So this is our agenda today that we have. We're going to spend some time doing some introductions and give some updates about the system of care. We're going to overview the integrated core practice model, part 2, and we're going to spend some time for questions and answers. So for the introductions, I would love for all of our major partners to spend a few minutes introducing who is present today. So Department of Social Services, I'll kick it over to you first.
Good morning, I'm Ashley Franklin, part of the AB 2083 System of Care State TA team.
Good morning, Diana Wagner with California Department of Social Services with Continuum of Care Reform and System of Care team.
Good morning, Rich Connect, Integrated Services Advisor for the Department of Social Services.
Christine Bagley, Department of Developmental Services. Welcome.
Renzo Bernalis, California Department of Education. Sorry, Lindsay, go ahead.
That's okay, Renzo. This is Lindsay Merwin with Department of Healthcare Services. I'm part of the System of Care TA team.
Renzo, I wasn't sure if you're finished, but if you are.
Yeah, go ahead, Teddy.
Okay, great, thanks. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Teddy Gonzalez from the Department of Healthcare Services. Within the Medi-Cal Behavioral Health Division, I'm part of the State System of Care TA team, along with my colleagues, Olivia Almaraz and Paul Brzezinski, who are also part of the team, and with Lindsay as well. Thank you.
Excellent.
And just
so
in case that, sorry, Nancy, just in case that you guys didn't get my name, Renzo Bernalis with the California Department of Education, or you've heard it 5 times this morning already. I don't know.
Thanks, Renzo. I appreciate it. Okay, so we are going to spend a little bit of time talking about the system of care updates. And Ashley, I'm turning it over to you.
Yeah, so I'll share a reminder from some information about the system of care updates and then one for CDSS as well. For system of care, we'd like to offer a reminder that our children and youth system of care state TA team, the folks that you just met, are available for support with your AB 2083 MOU development and system of care implementation. More information regarding that TA is available in ACL 20-63. We will paste that link in the chat for you in a moment so you have easy access to it. And additionally, you're always welcome to email us at systemofcare@dss.ca.gov, and we can get you hooked up for some support. I will offer just one more update from CDSS. An allocation for the MOU development related expenses was available for the 2019-2020 state fiscal year. CDSS has been committed to assisting counties in accessing that allocation as it's described in CFL 1920-61. I will post that also in the chat in a moment. If you or your local team has not yet submitted an invoice, we have a little bit of time left to work with you on that. If you're interested, please email us. Again, that's systemofcare@dss.ca.gov to request an extension. Either a completed MOU or in lieu of that completed MOU, a status update and list of interagency leadership team members and their signatures was required to be submitted with this invoice. You can check out CFL 1920-61E. I will also post that one in the chat for you in a moment for details regarding the status update requirements. Regardless of whether your local team decided to submit a claim, a status update was due if your team did not submit a completed MOU by June 30th. For counties that have not yet submitted a status update, our team has been reaching out to check in with your local teams about that. And just again, a reminder that our team is available for additional conversations and support or phone calls as needed. And I will get that TA information posted up in chat for you. I'll hand it off to either DHCS or CDE for their department updates now.
I'll go ahead and provide the updates from CDE. So CDE's had a pretty busy month. We have 4 guidance documents that have been released. 3 guidance documents that have been released and a link for a resource. So the first one is a guidance on best practices for distance learning instructional planning. So this is guidance that's meant for educators that are implementing distance learning instruction and offers suggestions in 4 key areas. Provides clear definitions of instructional models and language and an overview of daily required minutes for attendance for the 2021 school year. So this will be provided as a hyperlink once the webinar is posted on the California Health and Human Services webpage. And there is a dedicated distance learning webpage on the CDE website. And the email address is distancelearning@cde.ca.gov. And I'll post links to all this information in the chat in a minute. There is also a guidebook for the safe reopening of California's public schools. It's available on a CDE webpage that contains guidance and resources for reopening of schools. More updates are expected. And on August 25th of 2020, so this past month, the California Department of Public Health released guidance for small supervised groups of children that applies to educational and childcare settings, which include special education and things like after-school programs. The guidance document is available through the hyperlink provided. And for any questions related to that particular guidance, the agency to contact is the California Department of Public Health. And I'll provide a link to their webpage as well. And since special education is spelled out or called out in sections of that guidance, if you have questions regarding the implementation of that guidance for special education, I'll provide you with an email address to send queries in for special education at CDE. The last one is a hyperlink to a new web page that's created by the Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program Technical Assistance Contractor that CDE uses. And this web page contains resources that are applicable to foster youth programming at schools. The page was recently launched, I believe it was in July, so it's pretty new. It's got a ton of information, including sections on AB 2083. So, and again, I'll provide links to all that information in the chat. And that's all for CD.
Awesome, excellent. Thanks, Renzo. Thanks, Ashley. So we're going to do, I get the fun part of doing polling questions. So I'm going to ask another polling question. which is, this one has a lot of options. So we would like to know what early successes you all have experienced in starting your system of care MOU development. It's a multiple choice, and if you are not finding one or more options that you would like to select, then you can add in an early success into the chat window. So we'd like to just hear what are some small successes? What are some little things that you're doing, or what are some big things that you're doing? So spend a few minutes or a few moments to look at that. Oops, and I just got I forgot that DHCS has an update. Sorry about that. Teray, we'll go after the polling question.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so people are still voting. There's a lot of words on the screen. It takes a few minutes to read all of them. And again, we'd love to hear if there is something that's not listed here on the in the options, then please feel free to let us know in the chat window what are some small successes or big successes. Early successes is what we want to know. Okay, I'm going to count to 10. I'll try to do it in my head. Oh, good. Excellent. We've got some folks in the chat window. All right, I'm going to end the polling and share the results so everybody can see. This is great. So we've got 53 out of 190 said that they are talking more regularly with other department or agency leaders. That is fabulous. That is excellent. 49 or 26% are thinking about how resources might be shared. Look at this, 53 have a draft or completed MOU for system of care. That is a pretty awesome success. And then 17 are looking at having delivered or planning to deliver training. That is awesome, excellent. Okay, I'm gonna stop that. So Teray, why don't you give us your updates, and then actually, let's look and see what's in the chat window. So there's initiation of conversations, scheduled meetings. This is just awesome. Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. Okay, Teray, let's hear your updates.
Hi again, this is Tere Gonzalez from DHCS. Just wanted to give you a update on the foster care model of care work group. DHCS has continued meeting for the foster care model of care work group, which is working to create a long-term plan for how children and youth in foster care receive healthcare services. In August, we saw two state presentations, one for Arizona and Washington, and they presented on their respective programs to the work group. And County Behavioral Health Directors Association of California shared their proposal. For more information about the foster care model of care work group, you can go to the website. I am going to put that website on the chat. If anyone's looking to join these meetings, there isn't one in September, but they will resume in October. Thank you, Nancy.
Sure thing. Are there other updates? Did I miss anybody else? Okay, so then we're going to do one more polling question after this. So we've got what we'd like to know, what are some of your biggest insights about the system of care during the past 6 months? And while you're taking a minute to reflect on some of the insights that you've had through this, and all of these polling questions will actually really help us understand a little bit more about how to work these webinars and provide technical assistance. So thank you for taking your time to do this. And there was a question in the chat window if you'll be able to get the chat, and you can actually save the chat feature, everything that's in the chat. So there's 3 little dots, and if you click on those, then I think it says to save your chat. but we will send all of this information out to you. So everything, all of the links, all of the documents will all be sent to you. Okay, so we are going to end the polling. People are still answering. A couple of more. Okay, I'm gonna end the polling and share the results. So you can see the majority is, it's more than the completion of an MOU. So that's a good insight. You have a genuine alignment of vision and purpose from agency leaders and staff. Awesome, excellent. Handful of you are not part of the System of Care team. We're glad that you're here. We're very, very glad that you're here to learn about the System of Care. So if you have other insights, please feel free to put those in the chat window as well. And then I'm going to open this up. Does anybody from the System of Care team have any thoughts or, yeah, just any thoughts about some of these insights that people have shared? I'll put you on the spot. Okay, so I'm just going to click through our next slide and we're going to keep on moving. So I believe I did the introductions. I should have waited until this to do the introductions. But Diana, I believe you're going to take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. Good morning, everyone. So the integrated core practice model contains shared values, core components, and standards of practice reflecting current research on collaborative and integrated family-centered services. And so that is an important piece of the work that you are doing with children and families and also with each other. As the ICPM, it provides guidance and a direction to support county child welfare, behavioral health, and probation teams. As originally, this did come from the KDA settlement. We are currently engaging stakeholders in the process in order to expand the ICPM to take into consideration all the partners of the 2083 team and also others. Next slide. So a little bit of the history of the integrated core practice model is that originally it was released in 2011 as part of the KDA class action settlement that started many years prior to that. There was further development that went on and research was done from 2012 to 2016 by the county child welfare directors. And there was exploration with partners and a transition to the integrated core practice model actually in 2018. And there are currently revisions that are underway that we expect to see at the end of 2020, early 2021. Next slide. So what is important to know that currently with the integrated core practice model, we have feedback from the mental health, probation, and child welfare. We have also elicited feedback and input to enhance the integrated core practice model from foster youth, family resource centers, prevention systems, also education partners in schools, and STRTP and FFA providers. There are 3 groups that are currently pending that are in the process of providing feedback to the ICPM, which is Regional Center, parents and bio families, and also tribes. And again, our plan is that all 7 of these groups that we have worked with and talked to are in the process of doing so through Richard and his team, that we will have this original 2018 ICPM integrated with all partners and modified, and again plan to have out version 3.0 by the 1st of 2021. So Richard, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Diana. Really appreciate that. The Integrated Core Practice Model is a very unique document for a number of reasons. It is mostly unique in its efforts to link multiple child and family youth serving systems. In jurisdictions across the country where practice models are in use, they're most often held solely by the welfare authority, the child welfare authority, or by the behavioral health authority. In many systems of care, there are integrated practice models that span 2 systems. And so California's practice model is exceptionally unique in its efforts to, up to this point, link 3 systems, soon to link 5 systems, and to be informed, as Diana has thoughtfully reflected here, by many, many other constituencies, and ultimately assist and support practice for every single child and youth serving system in the state. That effort is acknowledged in this quote, which I love, from a former federal child welfare chief, now retired, Brian Samuels at Chapin Hall, who acknowledges that California's work in this area has been super important and is really charting new territory for the child and family service field and for system of care in particular. Next slide. To orient you very quickly, if you are unfamiliar to Integrated Core Practice Model, it outlines a set of practice behaviors, which we'll talk about a little bit as we move forward, but it anchors itself in the 5 phases or elements or components of a good service episode. So from the time a child and family enter care through a process of engagement and assessment, and then by engaging and assessing with a service team, getting services, implementing that plan, adjusting, monitoring, and adapting that plan, and then with the family and their natural supports, putting together a good transition plan. This is the kind of universal methodology, if you will, again, or phases of care that is outlined in the Integrated Core Practice Model. And it's among the most well-researched components of the practice model. And those of you who are familiar with other approaches to care will certainly recognize that there's a universality to this that should resonate with you, even if you're unfamiliar with ICPM. I'm going to yield to Renzo, who's going to begin to talk to us a little bit about the unique and powerful connections that are available within a public education system of care.
Thank you, Richard. So typically or historically in system of care, the relationship has been primarily between the child welfare agency and the behavioral health or mental health department. However, we know that all of our foster youth are enrolled in California public schools, so there is a unique and important role for public education to play in this new conceptualization of system of care under AB 2083, where we're now branding it as Children and Youth System of Care. An important point for system partners to be aware of is to recognize how public education policies and practices parallel or track with the 5 key concepts and the 10 core principles that are contained in the Integrated Core Practice Model. Once you have that understanding, then it allows for connections such as being able to cross-train county foster youth coordinators who are at the county office of ed, and district foster youth liaisons and other educational partners to the information that's contained in the Integrated Core Practice Model. What educators will find through these training opportunities is that teaming processes that they're involved in that are part of public education really are very, very similar to the teaming process that's described in the Integrated Core Practice Model. Next slide, please. So one large area of public policy overlap is between the ICPM and multi-tiered system of supports. The multi-tiered systems of support really deal with system of care type of engagement, and the community connection that's called for in MTSS is what connects MTSS to AB 2083. Both processes, or both public policies, if you would like to phrase it that way, start with a student and family centered lens. That's where the purpose of the work gets started. From the MTSS point of view, the school becomes the vehicle or the location for transformation, meaning that the school itself can be the entity that provides supports and services that allows for changes for a student that will lead to improvements both with their academic standing, social emotional standing, and these then help to create permanency for the placement as well as educational stability. The point of intervention from the MTSS lens is the district, because the district is the entity that plans for how different supports and services will be allocated throughout the district, which types of supports and services will be provided at particular school sites, and engages in planning from a program perspective for foster youth services and other student population groups, such as English learners or students with disabilities that are covered through special education. That community connection that's called for within the multi-tiered system of support then creates an engagement to a county's children and youth system of care. And that county system of care can provide an additional source of technical support to the school district, to the school, and ultimately back to the family and the student. And in addition, that system of care at the children and youth system of care at the county level can work to collaborate and integrate services provided by other partners, which may or may not be made available to the student and family through the school, or could be made available separately, but it becomes the linkage point to pull both systems together. Next slide, please.
Hi, sorry, Renzo. I was looking for my unmute button. We have a couple of questions, hands that are raised. Richard and I were just chatting. Should we wait a minute, Richard, or should we let people ask questions now?
Why don't we finish up the MTSS system of care
Okay.
connection, and then we'll call on folks, because we may answer their questions.
Okay.
Let's go to the next slide, and I'll hit that really fast, then get back to Renzo to finish this up. And apologize for the background noise that you may be hearing. I am downtown Sacramento. The real power in a local system of care leadership teams recognizing the connectivity between multi-tiered systems of support implementation and its 2083 system of care work is that it effectively extends the reach of your system of care work much deeper into your community. 98% of the young people who are likely to penetrate a deep end county or regional system are also in public education classrooms. And so the alignment between the multi-tiered systems implementation and system of care presents a very unique and powerful opportunity to get us to a prevention-focused system of care, to align and leverage our funding in unique ways, to really drive us into a community-centered approach, and most critically, to minimize the trauma that is often caused when families have to navigate multiple systems, and particularly into deeper ends of that system in foster care, probation, or acute behavioral health services. So the nexus of multi-tiered systems of support and system of care are significant. There was a question in chat about what's the impact of this, or the connectivity with the Family First Prevention Services Act, and clearly in a thoughtful interagency leadership conversation around how to implement the core practice model, the impacts to your family first prevention services planning locally should be self-evident in terms of where the local partners will invest their resources that are projected to be saved under FFPSA, and where to invest your other prevention services. So there is a unique capacity, I think, within systems of care implementation and ICPM use to do a really thoughtful approach to implementation of FFPSA. I'm going to pass back to Renzo, and then let's, for 2 more slides, and then let's maybe pause there and take those questions, Nancy.
Got it. Great.
So, thank you, Richard. So what we've looked at is utilizing public policy as a means of looking for linkages between public education and system of care to create a child and youth system of care as envisioned by the AB 2083 MOUs and lead to system integration. So your MOU conversations can lead to greater interagency collaboration and integrated service delivery to foster youth. And in those conversations with your public education partners, primarily your county office of education, and then depending on your county, if you've included SELPA or other entities, really look at that integration through a multi-tiered system of support framework for public education, which will allow public education to connect school services to county children and youth system of care. Next slide, please. This provides a very brief overview of what multi-tiered system of support is for public education. The framework allows for the integration of different support systems that are provided either at the school or at the district level to be connected to provide a continuum of options within the public education sphere, ranging from very, the least restrictive types of interventions all the way to very restricted or targeted interventions, as you would see, for example, through a student's individualized education program. So when you hear public education talk about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, what they're talking about is the placement of different types of support systems or supportive services, and how they relate to their intensity within an MTSS framework, again, for a school or for a district. What the framework allows for is for quite a bit of family and community engagement through the implementation of the services throughout those different tiers. It allows for administrative leadership to be able to look at their school and their district from a system perspective and be able to integrate those services and supports in a systemic fashion. So that gets to the integrated framework piece. And MTSS, the framework itself, provides us with the ability of acting on policy requirements, but making those policy requirements become an effective part of the practice for delivering instruction and services through public schools. This can be further aligned by looking at ways of tying together the MTSS framework that's utilized by a given district or by a given county office of education with the 10 core principles of the ICPM. When educators really start to take a look at the ICPM and the core principles, it should really resonate with the language that they see that's embedded within the MTSS framework and within their county office of education and district programming that's based on MTSS. Next slide, and I can't quite remember who our next speaker will be, but I think we're taking questions and answers first.
Thanks, Renzo.
So we have one question in the question and answer window. I'm not sure if you want to answer that, now, and then there are 2 participants that have their hands raised. And you guys, Paul and Christina, can either type in the chat window, or I can attempt to unmute you, although it might be easier if you type in the chat window. But Richard, do you want to take a look at the question in the question and answer box? Do you want me to
Sure,
read
I
it
see
out?
them.
Yeah, that's the one from Patty, right? Richard, do you want me
Yeah.
to take a stab at it?
Sure, have at it.
Okay. Yeah. So Patty, I think this is the reason why we need to have open communication from the get-go between the different system partners. And by what I mean by that is that it becomes incumbent, and I'll use public education as my focal point, because this is something that's impacted me directly doing interagency work. I have had to take it upon myself to learn systems and other agencies to understand how their definition for something as simple as it would seem from the outside for how foster youth are defined, how they're similar and how they're not the same, so that we can all be on the same page to start off with. If we all have different conceptions of what a foster youth is, then we're not going to be able to have common ground, which will lead us to implementing a decision-making process that's based on consensus. So you're going to see similar interactions when you start doing cross-system work between public education and healthcare. For example, under Medi-Cal, there are terms that are the exact same term, but are defined differently in Medi-Cal than they are under special education. So both systems need to know how the other system defines that term, so that they're not speaking across each other and are speaking based on a common understanding of each system. I don't think we're going to be able, I would love to say that we're going to be able to get to a place where the same term will be defined exactly the same between all system partners, but given that we're all, that we all have to respond to specific regulatory and statutory requirements, it's not likely that we'll be able to have, one major crosswalk that will be able to define a term commonly between all the agencies that are involved. So the best thing to do is to have common training and grow the knowledge base as a system of care team, so that your members of your children and youth system of care have that understanding of how those terms are applied within each of the individual systems, to then allow for collaboration and ultimately integrated service delivery. Richard, do you want to add to that? I'm trying to answer the question, but I'm not sure if I'm answering it directly, if that makes sense.
I appreciate that, Renzo. And Patty, I think it's a beautiful question, because it really reinforces the need for a commonly held set of language and approaches. And that's what the integrated core practice model seeks to do. So within the ICPM, a common approach to the elements of care, to the practice behaviors that each professional and paraprofessional that touches the life of the young person and family, those things are all, if they're held enough in alignment through, as Renzo mentioned, common training to that practice model across the systems, that's where we begin to get the alignment. So I think the next couple of slides may further give us a chance to elaborate on this question, but I love the inquiry.
So I see that there's also a question from Rena Rojas in regards to connecting foster and kinship care education training programs provided by community colleges to the ICPM effort. Rena, the engagement that the Department of Education had with the Department of Social Services on looking at the ICPM really covered transitional kindergarten through 12th grade, as the CDE, as you know, is not engaged with community colleges. However, we know that our foster youth will transition from primary education to post-secondary education at some point. So at the county level, your best point of contact with public education is through the foster youth coordinator at the County Office of Education. And that person will be able to pull in the foster youth liaisons at each of the districts that could be considered feeder schools into a particular community college.
So Renzo, I'd like to add a little bit to that, because Rena's question was asking about with foster and kinship care education training programs for caregivers at community colleges, how are they able to connect with partners in order to bring the ICPM efforts into their training? And so in a piece with that I would recommend to our community college partners that are training our foster parents and caregivers of foster youth and want to integrate ICPM is also to reach out and connect with county child welfare departments within the counties that you serve, because that will be an opportunity for you to get some ideas of how to bring ICPM into some of the training that you're doing with foster and kinship caregivers.
All right, Nancy, let's
Next slide.
Let's go to the next slide if we can. These next two slides we won't spend much time on. We have borrowed from the state technical guidance that's available in the state's toolkit. We have a link for that toolkit, I think, at the end of our presentation. If not, we'll make sure that we provide that to you again in the chat. But there are some important questions that local system designers and folks involved with ICPM implementation can ask themselves to really move the conversation forward. And I would just quickly spend a moment on this first question here. I think it's really foundational. Are all agencies aware of the ICPM? And clearly at this early juncture of implementation in California, the answer to that will be no. And so we have an opportunity and a need to really orient each other to the ICPM. And in early 2021, as Diana mentioned earlier, we hope to have an updated version of the integrated core practice model that builds on all of the prior work that will speak more concretely to all of our constituencies. But there's no need to wait till then, really. If you'd like to orient to it, we would encourage you to engage particularly with your child welfare partners who have been pursuing core practice model implementation for some time now within their sphere. I would also recommend that the interagency leadership team really spend a moment or two orienting itself not only to the practice model and what's contained within it, but to a commitment to the leadership behaviors which are contained within the practice model. We'll talk about those in a couple of minutes. So let's do the next slide, and I'll just let you pause there for a moment, just reflect on the questions there. Drawing out in particular the fact that one of the goals of the system of care implementation and the use of a uniform practice model is to minimize the trauma for young people and families and systems. And it really is the ICPM is the pathway. That common language, the seamlessness of the approach is a way to effectively mitigate entry into deep end systems for foster youth and others. And so we really see ICPM use across a broad spectrum as one pathway to supporting that trauma-informed care. And next slide. Likewise, the guidance within the state's toolkit invites local partners to talk about how do we find MOU or Memorandum of Understanding based language and have that reflective of our approach locally for integrated core practice model. If you're familiar with the MOU elements that are required under AB 2083, I believe it's section 2 of the MOU, but we at the state invite local system of care designers and implementers to articulate in the MOU what the integrated core practice model will mean to you in your local partnerships. And the intent here really is to establish a process for ensuring across sector participation, to ensure that all system partners know the role of their team members in supporting the ICPM, and some statement about how the system partners will cross-train to integrated core practice model. I can't overstate the imperative to get multiple cross-system partners in the same training ecology. The richness of that cross-training to integrated core practice can be profound. And I'll yield back to Diana.
Thank you, Richard. So the shared ICPM and person-centered planning values include family, child, and driven plans and meetings that occur. They should be community-based and culturally competent. So that's throughout all the work that we do collectively as a system of care. The shared principles include family, youth choice, team-based, natural supports, strength-based, individualized, and outcomes-based, because we want to make sure of the direction that we're going in. And if you remember from Renzo talking earlier, this does very well match up with the student-centered planning. Next slide. So as part of that joint planning, we need to make sure that all necessary partners participate in the planning and development of services and supports that include the children and their families, and always utilizing the ICPM and person-centered planning model. We want to integrate plans as much as possible with the services and support to help promote the design and outcome for the child and family resulted from the ICPM and the CFT meeting. And so as much as possible, ensuring that the plans that we are developing, they truly overlap so that everybody is on the same page and children and families don't have several plans that they are working from. We want to make sure, as Richard said earlier, we were going to work with our local partners and agencies and making sure that we're cross-training, and we want to have informed service professionals on the ICPM in order to do the work. Next slide. So an additional practice for our success is to emphasize collaboration with the CFT engagement and making sure that all partners are available and at the table, even if that's over WebEx or telephone, including our important partners such as teachers. We want partner agencies practicing family engagement, so collectively working together with social workers and mental health, also including teachers and our regional center partners when working with families and children. And we should have the ICPM influence all aspects of our engagement, our assessment and service planning and delivery, also our monitoring and adapting, and then the transition of services. And we should make sure that we practice this work with one another. Next slide. So an important piece of this work is making sure that we have the right people on the team working for the family and the youth. And so including them at the meetings is vital. Making sure that our regional center partners are there if they are a child of the regional center. Remembering our Department of Rehab, they are able to provide some very vital services for our foster youth, especially in the older teenage years as they need to develop some of their skills and move towards the workforce. Always having tribal representatives at the table, advocacy groups, County Office of Education, that would also include the school the child is at as part of their education, having the foster parent there, and at times even judges or attorneys when they are an important part of the team. Next slide. Can you go back one? I think that, Christine?
Sorry.
There.
I'm sorry.
No worries. And I just saw a comment in the chat box that that said SELPAs, and certainly SELPAs are a really important partner to have at the table as well. So I just wanted to call that out. So this slide kind of references the alignment of the ICPM with other practice models. So you can see here safety, organized practice, juvenile justice crossover models, as Renzo was kind of highlighting earlier, multi-tiered system of supports, person-centered planning and thinking, child welfare core practice model, kind of the prior versions. And so I think, you know, we've kind of seen that threaded throughout this conversation today, that there really are parallels within these other practice models. And so finding the threads and the commonalities between all of these various models that all of our systems access is important, and finding the unity to kind of thread and bring them together. When we look at person-centered planning and thinking, person-centered planning in the regional center culture is, you know, a planning and decision-making process and framework, you know, and there's quite a few parallels between that process being person-centered or family, you know, child-driven, community-based, culturally competent, natural support, strength-based. So when we can find those commonalities, it really helps us unify the way that we're approaching our planning with our partners and moving in a unified direction for that child and family. And there was actually a comment or a question in the question and answer box earlier about, wouldn't a kind of glossary of terms be beneficial to have in the MOU? And I just to kind of highlight that question, I think that there are a lot of benefits to kind of unifying our language and making sure that when we say, you know, person-centered or ICPM or child family-centered, that we all mean the same thing. So I'll turn it back over to Diana, but just to kind of highlight those common models that we all share.
Thanks, Christine. And so I do want to make sure that we call out a resource for the ICPM, as there are some great tools that have been developed and published by the California Child Welfare Directors Association, and with the support and help of several child welfare directors in that development of the core practice model. And so again, there are some great resources that are available, and I will make sure I put the link to those tools in the chat box.
Thanks, Diana. And those tools, I think we actually referenced them either maybe last month's presentation, but they're available at the CalSWEC website as well. And we can make sure folks get connected to those. And it really leads us to a conversation for a moment around readiness. It's one thing to have a lovely document that says how we're going to work together with kids and families in California. It's another thing to really have a conversation about how to effectively use that document. And it becomes even more complex in a multi-sector environment, right? And so we just wanted to spend a moment or two talking about readiness and what that means in a really complex system of care, particularly in California, where we have a really expansive approach to the partnership, which is makes it more complex, but also wonderfully potentially powerful. So just for a quick moment, the idea of implementation science can be helpful here. Just an awareness that there are phases to how practice models and practice approaches get implemented. So just being thoughtful about exploring together with your partners, implementing, staying open to inquiry and learning from each other, and talking about where the resources and abilities and willingness of each partner are in the current environment. We're super mindful in Sacramento that right now in the midst of a pandemic, certainly our resources and abilities may be challenged and depleted. We have, I think, made the point earlier in prior presentations about one of the powerful elements of system of care is that those resource scarcities can be addressed through partnership. And so it really highlights both the need and the imperative to be in partnership so that the resources for implementation can be shared. This is what we're talking about here is cross-training, right? Like, because not all partners will have the resources to train to ICPM, but some partners do have training resources. And if we effectively open those doors to a full spectrum of partners in a local setting, then we begin to maximize our resources. Organizations that nurture readiness are likely to initiate change, to exert the needed effort, and to exhibit organizational persistence, if you will, and display more cooperation and adaptability. The integrated core practice model needs active support in order to be developed, nurtured, and sustained across the process of implementation. Next slide. So communicating around readiness is an important function of the interagency leadership team and of managers and supervisors within a system of care. The goals of that include those listed here. And this takes us back, I think, to one of the earlier inquiries in chat, which is what's the connection between ICPM and something like Family First Prevention Services Act. And I would just articulate, I think, that effective communication and use of the integrated core practice model doesn't just support FFPSA, doesn't just support multi-tiered systems of support. It actually can become an anchor and a platform upon which we address all reform efforts in child and youth services. This might include county systems that are following up on their KDA implementation work, the safety organized practice work, probation authorities that are implementing evidence-based practices within an ICPM lens, if you will, whole person care. All those reform efforts can effectively be based within a common language that's found within integrated core practice model. When we talk about it and communicate it to partners, doing so from a lens of readiness can be critical. And we're gonna hear shortly from our partners in San Francisco who'll talk a little bit about that. Let's see, next slide. So really briefly, one of the really powerful elements of integrated core practice is found in the current version as an appendix. In the 2021 version that you'll hopefully get early next year, we'll build this right into the base of the document, but right now it's at the very end. But there are a unique set of leadership behaviors that were inspired by the California welfare practice model and some of the CAP work that was done by welfare partners many years ago. And they really are in 4 areas. It's a demonstration of willingness to share resources and responsibility for all youth, regardless of their legal responsibility, beginning to see all youth as our youth instead of carving youth into sectors just because that's how our funding comes to us, or that's what the feds say we should do. We want to explore with partner agencies the perceived barriers and develop solutions for implementing and sustaining core practice over time. It's imperative that leaders effectively communicate with staff about the purpose and importance of the ICPM implementation and identify your ongoing commitment and what they can expect from you and what your own team members within your department or agency can expect from you. Finally, there are behaviors which focus on involvement of system partners in establishing clear and measurable agency division and system goals for implementation that become part of your memorandum of understanding, and that you articulate them there in section 2 of your MOU. Lindsay.
Hey, so a little bit about the ICPM training. The training to the ICPM is most effective when it's delivered in a cross-system and multi-agency setting. Sharing of system partners' training resources is likely needed and found to be helpful. Persons with lived experiences, such as the youth or parent partners, system navigators, cultural brokers, are often powerful voices in cross-training. That was a really quick slide. I'll pass that back to Diana.
So I'm actually going to, this actually goes to Richard to introduce San Francisco County.
All right, Diana, thanks, and Lindsay, thanks for that. I'm going to introduce Liz Crudo and let her introduce her teammates, but we are so honored to have San Francisco area folks on the line with us to talk to us about some of their early conversations around ICPM. And I would just preface this with not only an expression of gratitude for Liz and her team, but with an acknowledgement that ICPM is new. It's very new for some partners. And so this early look from a local partnership is just intended to really begin to prime the pump of our thinking collectively at the county level about what's possible under ICPM. So there's no right or wrong answers. And we deeply appreciate Liz and her team for sharing what their early thinking is. Liz?
Thanks, Richard. Hello, everyone. I'm actually going to introduce Joan Miller, who is our Child Welfare Deputy Director, and she's going to kick off our presentation today and introduce our panelists.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us. We are just as honored to be here as you are to have us. So as Liz said, I'm Joan Miller, the Child Welfare Director in San Francisco City and County. And with us today, we have our fantastic partners. Chris Lavoie, who's the Assistant Director for our Children, Youth, and Family System of Care with Behavioral Health. We have Lisa Rosine, who is our Regional Center Partner with Golden Gate Regional Center. We have Gary Levine, who is with our Juvenile Probation Department, and he is a Supervising Probation Officer. And we have Shira Andren with SFUSD, which is San Francisco Unified School District Foster Youth Services. So she coordinates all of our foster youth services through the school district. And then we have, last but very not least, Liz Crudo, who's a program manager in FCS and who has kind of shepherded us along on this process. So thank you, Liz. And I'm going to kick it over to Liz now so she can do the next slide, please.
Diana, can you guys move to the next slide? Thank you. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about San Francisco, and as many of you know, we have some very unique qualities that lend itself to a specific kind of partnership within our county. So it's a small geographic region, about 7 square miles, with a population of about 850,000 people, so dense, urban area, and the city equals the county. There is no outlying suburban or rural area, so San Francisco itself is the county, and that allows us to really maximize our funding streams because we're getting, the funding streams for the city and the county. So that allows for a very resource-rich delivery system. Although the challenge with that is because San Francisco is so neighborhood-based, sometimes things can be siloed. But again, it allows us to have a very generous, resource-rich community support system. We also have, for child welfare specifically, historically low turnover, staff turnover, lower than typical for child welfare agencies. That's changed a little bit in the last couple of years, but what it does mean is that folks are there a long time, and so that gives opportunity for a lot of deep and long-standing relationships across partners. We also have a relatively small client population. We're typically considered a large county, but our child welfare cases are actually just under about 1,100 cases, and about a quarter of those are in-home. and that also includes our older youth. And then juvenile probation has right now about 500 cases, and that includes their AB-12 youth and their diversion cases. So that really, you know, we know who the families are, we know where they are. And again, it's concentrated in this very small geographic region. Golden Gate Regional, on the other hand, serves both Marin and San Mateo counties, as well as San Francisco. The San Francisco Unified School District is the only school district in the county. So that makes it more efficient in terms of working relationships because we're just dealing with that one entity. And similarly, we have a standalone juvenile probation department. So unlike all the other probation departments in the state, juvenile probation is its own department in contrast to adult probation. So that means as a county, we have a more concentrated approach to focusing on children and youth because we're dealing with fewer agents. And it also means it tends to be the same people at the table. So you know each other because we're all sitting together at these multiple meetings. Our offices are within easy proximity of each other. We have a lot of staff co-located with each other. Mental health has staff both at probation offices and child welfare offices. Education has staff at the probation offices. Golden Gate Regional is just like 2 or 3 blocks from the child welfare office. So there's easy proximity. So that kind of sets the stage for partnership. We actually began developing core practice model behavior long before there was a specific model or CCR. So I think that really builds on longstanding practice and decades of partnership efforts in the county. Some examples about that include, you know, the development of the foster care mental health unit about 25 years ago. That's the managed care arm for child welfare and juvenile probation. That's sort of when that co-location started developing. So again, that goes back decades. Foster care mental health started adopting the CANs a number of years ago to screen youth and link them with appropriate services. When we started doing KDA, we brought together a number of county and provider partners to develop a trauma-informed attachment-based approach among the city departments and CBO partners to serve system-involved youth. So we try to think outside of just the specific focus around KDA. And we've also had parent and youth partnerships. That's had different configurations over time, but for a number of years, we've had youth representation and peer partner programs, both through contracts and or programs at DPH that child welfare has supported through a work order of general fund dollars over to that department to help support that programming. So their programs have served not just mental health families, but families in the child welfare and probation system. And we also have a very robust Family Resource Center initiative that we partner with Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and our first 5 agencies with a number, like over 20 Family Resource Centers. So we have a joint funding stream that supports that through contracts that that first 5 initiate. So it's really kind of a centralized, streamlined approach to supporting the Family Resource Centers, which eliminates duplication on a number of fronts. And we have finally a provider advisory board for child welfare key contractors and partners, and mental health and juvenile probation join us at those quarterly meetings. So that gives you kind of a sense of some of the initiatives and projects that we've had over the years that set the stage for the implementation of the MOU. I do want to mention too, we have a work order process. I don't know if other counties have this, but it allows us to maximize our funding, including EPSCT funding, and provide fiscal support where we can't draw down or leverage other state and federal dollars to close gaps. So basically what we're doing is taking general fund. And for example, child welfare has a budget. We send hundreds of thousands of general fund dollars over to mental health to help provide the match and maximize EPSCT funding. So that allows for a more robust service delivery model that is shared and jointly shepherded by the different city aides. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and he's going to talk about our approach. And so Diana, you can go on to the next slide.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Liz. That was a wonderful description of the great things that we have to our advantage here in San Francisco. And I think we're fortunate to have the framework, an existence of resources. But even with those, we still have to have the right people to work within that framework. And we have the right people and we have the right approach. And I think we're very lucky that everyone who joined our child serving system here in the city embraces core concepts right out of the gate. And those of us that have been around for a while, we kind of expect people who come that are newer to embrace these core concepts. So it's just part of our culture here. And I think a guiding principle is that these are our families. And I think that we think of the families touching different city departments at different times, sometimes more than one, sometimes more than three. And we always have that in mind. And so when we think about that, we think about how does the family experience our system? And I think it's really important for us to think about collaboration, and that's what we do. And we do it in examples of, we have each other's cell phone numbers, we'll call whatever time of night we need to call each other to problem solve through something that's a crisis, an emergency. We don't use that as a template to drive decisions, but that is available to us. We have periodic meetings together. Like Liz mentioned, a lot of us are at the same table frequently. That's a good thing. We know each other. We have had a lot of stability overall for the last, I'd say, decade, but we've had a spike in some transition and some vacancies, at least within my department over at DPH. But I think it's attaching to the relationships that are here is so fundamentally important and grounds us in the vision that we've cultivated and that we all share, and that we don't make decisions in isolation. And we always are thinking about the other partners in relation to our decisions. And we're so connected and braided in our funding that it is remarkable. And even with that remarkable braided funding, it still is challenging. And so, we're painting this great picture because it is, but it doesn't mean that we always agree. It doesn't mean that we always see things exactly the same way, because each of our governing departments have different deadlines, different expectations, different deliverables. We know this, so we don't always agree, but there's a relationship foundation to arrive at joint decisions collectively and to the benefit of the families ultimately. So it's a driving principle that we have, and I think that augments the resources that we're lucky to have here in San Francisco. So I'll pass this over. So next slide.
So you're on for the next slide.
I had trouble unmuting myself, sorry. Hi, I'm Lisa Rosine with Golden Gate Regional Center. Prior to the implementation or working on the AB 2083 MOUs, San Francisco was working on their continuity of care reform efforts and decided as a county that they would have an MOU, and it was before anything was required. And they also had the foresight to invite regional center participation in that planning process. So I was involved for about a year and a half with the San Francisco Human Services Agency, Department of Public Health, Juvenile Probation, the school district, the courts, and attorneys for the city in that planning process. And so when it came time to do this MOU, I knew everyone, and I think everyone knew more about the regional center and about our role, and and where we fit into the city and county structure for supporting children that find themselves in the foster care system. And I think that's crucial. I think the relationships are vital to building the kinds of partnerships that AB 2083 envisions, and the kind of work we want to do together to truly look at these families and the children as ours, instead of, oh, it's a regional center client, or, oh, you just belong to child welfare. So I think that that is a key for anyone who's just beginning this work now, is to really have meaningful interaction with everyone at the table at the same time to see who has what role in helping families. The next slide.
Chris, you've got the next slide.
Yeah, so all of this being said, we get into the development of our MOU. And I think Liz touched on this earlier. The way we roll here in San Francisco, a lot of these core practices were being implemented, and now they're just defined. And so this is just giving a framework on a piece of legislation and paper to things that we were already kind of doing. So for us, elements of building this MOU were already in effect. And so this was just giving it an official, legitimate document in order for us to sign off on it, which was for us not a terribly arduous, difficult process, because we were just moralizing things that were already in place. So again, that's a testament to our relationships and our fortunate circumstances. But building in the framework of KDA was still very important to us. And so I don't want to understate that. And I think for us, the ICPM provides language and description for practices, again, that we've embraced for a long time. And it encourages us, though, to outreach to partner agencies and our providers from all the way from prevention through aftercare, and it spells that out in the MOU, so that we're just reminded of what our driving principles are. And I think that that is reassurance that we're going to stick to them, and that we've signed off on what we say we're going to do. And I think holding structure and expectations is always challenging, even in the best of times. And I think it is not just a piece of paper. We do value it, and we do reference it. We recently had to update it, and we visited it, and we refined some things, because reality is what it is, and continuous quality improvement is always important. But we still believe and wanted a document that provides the structure and expectations, but also allows for flexibility to allow for implementation of various efforts in different ways. And it builds off of our interagency meeting structures, which have been in place for a long time. They've been renamed, various different things. So we embedded in that MOU things that were already in existence that helped us implement the practices from the ICPM. And I will pass it over to Gary to say more.
Sorry, I'm also a troubled unmuter. But basically, we accomplished a lot of this. We had various meetings for years that were sort of siloed and housed in different departments. And 10, 12 years ago, we decided to create sort of this monster meeting, which we call MAST, Multi-Agency Services Team, which now covers, it's our IAPC, our subacute, our out-of-state approval process, our RAP approval process. All these things happen now at one table with the same players there, week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out. So like has been discussed earlier, it's really been the same players for years and years and years, and we know each other's systems intimately. And as Liz indicated, we have offices, shared spaces. It's working really well. Next slide.
So as, oh,
You skipped one. Can you go back one more slide? It jumped. There you go. So this is Liz again. I'm going to talk a little bit about just some of the groundwork for training and tools that we've developed, and then some of the other folks will chime in on that. So training is a critical strategy towards cross-system implementation, training and workforce development. And, you know, it starts at home, right? Like you have to develop your materials to communicate things to staff, to update curriculum, to put things on paper and policies and manuals. That's sort of your starting point. We've referenced the ICPM frequently in all those areas. We have a very strong workforce development team, and they were developed with a couple managers, Barry Johnson and Melissa Connolly, who had worked at CalSWEC. So, you know, Richard was talking about the toolkit on the CalSWEC site. They were familiar with a lot of that and able to use those resources as we have developed this whole workforce development approach. And we also integrate that within our policy team too. And we try and extend beyond sort of those very basic training components to communicate more fully with our staff in different venues, putting posters on the wall by the elevators. It's kind of moot right now with COVID, but it works really well when we're all in the office, where they give different examples of ICPM behaviors. If you look at the pictures here on the slide, these are a couple examples of that, of different communications that were developed by some of our units that went out to staff, either kind of flyers up on the wall or emails or discussed in meetings. On the left, you have an example of kind of an icebreaker meeting called the partner meeting. And that's where our CFT facilitators can facilitate a conversation between a parent and a caregiver in preparation for a CFT or family visitation or something like that. And so it links the components of that meeting to the different practices in the core practice model to make that link more explicitly for staff. Similarly, on the right hand, you've got a tip sheet from our CQI unit that they issue monthly, where they take a core practice model behavior, give an example of a demonstration of that they have found in one of the cases they reviewed that highlighted the behavior, and links it to our outcomes. So those are just a couple of tools that we've developed internally. And then what happens is our system partners can piggyback on that and use similar documents or those same documents in their own materials and training approaches. And so that helps us translate our systems for each other. So we've got a couple examples from Lisa and Gary and Shira about how that helps us inform each other of our systems and this approach to ICPM, so that staff can kind of see an integrated service delivery approach across our. So Lisa, you were going to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that, again, one of the things someone mentioned earlier, and I saw in the chat, you know, what someone asked what an acronym meant. And I think one of the things that's crucial to having the integrated core practice model across not just county systems, but then you add the regional center and you add education, is knowing what our acronyms mean. And I think we all get very, you know, we're all very used to what different acronyms mean in our own systems. But I often don't have a clue when I'm sitting at these meetings what's you know, a TPS, wraparound, core, you know, all the different things that get thrown out. So don't be afraid to ask what those mean in terms of how that might then relate to a similar process in your own department or your own system, and how those then overlap in the work that we're doing together. Liz, was there anything else I needed to cover on that one?
Gary's got another point on this one, and then Shira's going to talk about the next couple of slides.
Thank you.
For us, we've, oh, thanks, Lisa. We've partnered with the folks you see here on training to become a trauma-informed system. Additionally, we have worked to develop, train, and implement probation facilitated CFTs, and Human Services and DPH helped do that training for our staff, so that all the models are aligned, so that a CFT facilitated by probation looks like a CFT facilitated by DPH and HSA. So it's the familiarity for the youth that are in the various systems. So sharing training, protocols, processes are all a part of these. CFTs are relatively new to JPD. We were in San Francisco one of the first to implement, and now we are looking to implement for all youth, not just our foster youth. The values there, we hold these values to support the children and families across the system.
Next slide, Diana, and Cheryl will speak to that.
Yes, so as Liz mentioned, we are one school district, one SELPA, and one county office, all in one, which is the unique and gives us really the benefit. We sit in the center of all of our systems, but also when we looked at MTSS, being able to reach different parts of the district. So we are able to directly train school nurses, school social workers, school counselors, school psychologists, and more, and kind of translate the different systems. And equally, we also do that for everyone else to kind of demystify and connect with education. In the last few years, we've been working on ed planning, developing more ed planning around our social workers, which includes lots of training. So for example, we made like a slide like this to really look at the core practice behaviors and what does that mean when you're doing education planning, how do those translate? So trying to connect the two systems. And then next slide. And we really emphasize teaming, obviously. And we have this is the one where we do for outside providers, and we have a similar slide that we do for school district folks. And really, what does it mean in education, and who are really speaking to who are the different people that need to be on the team, and making sure they're ed rights holder. And I would say CQI also made a tip sheet around engaging educational rights holders, because we've done a lot of work in our county around that. So really continuing that. But we're very lucky to be a district and to be able to partner and really implement things more even at a school site level. So I will pass it to the next person. Next slide.
So before I talk a little bit about data, I saw there was a question in the chat about our workforce development team. That's a unit in Family and Children's Services. It's basically our training unit. But you know, we see it as beyond just training in a classroom. So that's why it's called workforce development. It consists of our training manager who works with Bay Area Academy. We have 3 child welfare coaches in that unit. And our interns and new staff also partner with some case caring workers in that unit to learn the system and learn how to work their cases. So data. So you've heard us talk about our great relationships and our partnerships, but you know, we really want to make sure we're on solid footing. You don't want everything to be based on your gut or on how well you know somebody. So it's really important we look at our data, make sure we're on the right track. make changes if we need to. And it can help convey information about our work as a communication tool in a concise way, a real visual way. And so that's helped staff and partners connect core practice model behaviors to outcomes and can motivate them to support outcome-based solutions, especially when you match data with stories, right? So you use the data to tell the stories of families, and that can inspire and motivate staff and partners. We have done a lot of work and have a lot of work still to do, but to conduct integrated data analysis on key projects. And you heard Richard kind of talk about sort of this broader approach to data analysis. What we've done is try and look at data from both the child welfare 4E placement data, as well as well-being outcomes from CANS assessments in trying to understand the needs of our families, the progress we've made in certain areas, and implementation of our initiatives and practices. So for example, in our wraparound contract, Seneca is our provider there, and also in our mobile response contract that we also have with Seneca, we worked with data folks, not just from Seneca, but from public health, from juvenile probation, and from HSA, to look at both the CANS data and what that was showing in terms of youth's well-being improvements, and also our placement outcomes to determine, and permanency outcomes, to determine the impact of those programs. And we look at entry cohorts of kids coming into care in a given period of time. So that leads to a more robust and solid analysis, and it kind of mitigates any historical impacts that may not be relevant anymore. So that entry cohort approach takes a long time to build up, but at the end of the day, it'll give us a more accurate picture for how effective our interventions are or not, so that we can make changes and improvements as needed. And we also look for our data partners to help us in ways that can inform our work and inspire our work. For example, probably a couple years ago now, our controller's office worked with our CAPC, which is Safe and Sound, and the county agencies, placement, mental health agency, child welfare, some of our other public partners, to map the array of prevention services across the city for families and children. Part of the reason we did that was to help us prepare for Family First, but also really just to look at prevention so that we can keep families from coming into our system and provide robust supports early on when they need it. And from that analysis came a new citywide prevention work group that Joan's going to talk more about in a minute. That work group also has a Casey Foundation at the table, and so they can provide data and information from other systems, other jurisdictions that can inform our work. So I'm going to turn it over to Joan, and she's going to talk. Oh, I'm sorry. Take that back. I'm going to turn it over to Gary to start, and then Joan to talk a little bit more about leadership. And next slide, please.
Thanks, Liz. I'm stalling for this slide to come up. So there it is, walking the walk, sort of the how of what we've been talking about. Shared funding, joint training, MOU development, all support interagency partnership. To accomplish this, we engage not only external, but internal partners like budget, fiscal, contracts, and data teams to identify and utilize resources and analyses needed for development and implementation of joint efforts. Some examples for juvenile probation, you've heard already, Department of Public Health has an office embedded within our building where they provide assessments and linkages to our youth. The county's RAP program includes JPD youth and is funded with child welfare 4E as well as mental health EPSDT funding streams. We recently signed a new 241 agreement with Human Services, reaffirming our joint commitment to work together for the best outcomes for our youth. And JPD is coordinating with our partner agencies to decriminalize children under 12, as well as youth who have been trafficked and also youth who are undocumented. Joan.
Thanks, Gary. Another way that we, walk the walk or walk the talk is that all of us are, and it's been mentioned before, we're always in touch with each other. So I'm in touch with my counterparts, probably more so, than I have been in any other place in probation and in behavioral health. And we're very much in lockstep. We don't hesitate to reach out and share information, ask questions like when ACLs come out, what does that mean for, us? Or, probation might call me and say, hey, how are you guys handling, I don't know, the in-person visits, say, have you transitioned back, so that we make sure we're always on the same page with each other. We do some basic training and information sharing, like, a day in the life of somebody at HSA or a day in the life of, probation. An example would be, because of the leadership that San Francisco has had, I think, up until the last couple of years, has made it easier for this to continue. We've always had a really good partnership with our probation and mental health partners at the very minimum. And we've had turnover in all three of the executive positions in the last couple of years. So probation got a new chief, I think, in January. I came on about 1.5 years ago in child welfare, and then Farah took over probably, I don't know, 8 months ago, 6 to 8 months ago, for children's behavioral health.
Approaching a year, almost a year.
Oh my God, the time just flies. Right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. But and even though there's been leadership change there, that the work has continued, and I feel like the work has continued in the same vein that it always has. So I think that has been pivotal, with everything that we've tried to do. So I will now forward to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about, we started at the beginning of COVID, we started a task force. I did actually with, it's pretty much the city departments that have, it's the city department heads that have anything to do with families and children. So it's child welfare, it's probation, it's behavioral health, it's Lisa from a regional center, and Safe and Sound. I think those are the two non-city department entities on this work group. There's also maternal and child health. We have Dr. Lee Kimberg from the hospital, who's sort of a local expert on intimate partner violence. We have my colleague from the benefits programs, the safety net programs, and First Five, and we have a couple of other agencies unique to San Francisco, like Department of Children, Youth and Families, and Our Children, Our Families. And we had started it when COVID, when we all sheltered in place, because we were all concerned about how are we, and SFUSD, my apologies. How are we going to reach these kids that were no longer coming into the hotline, right? Our hotline calls had dropped to 50% of normal when we all sheltered in place and kids weren't in school anymore. And we quickly realized that probably after the first meeting or two, that we didn't want this specific to COVID. We wanted this to have a much broader reach, because as you've heard mentioned, folks mentioned before, we're really resource rich in San Francisco, but we seem to be coordination poor. So the goal was initially, getting everybody at the table to figure out how we were going to serve these families in the community. And some of the stuff that has come out of that has been, the expansion of our mobile response team to non-child welfare and non-probation kids. It has been, the other thing that's come out of it is we're starting to talk about how we can serve families that have allegations of neglect, but that neglect is due to poverty only. So how can we serve those families, not through a child welfare system, but through the community? So it's in a way sort of trying to redefine how we're dealing with the families that are just neglect due to poverty. We've got, let's see, excuse me. We've got, like I said, we've got a lot of different people at the table, and everybody, we end up having these really rich discussions. We get presentations from other places like, and I think Lisa's going to talk to this in a minute, from some of our community partners, because we looked at went back to 2019 and we looked at our referrals that had to do with, say, neglect only. And our data folks really drilled down into those to see what were the factors that brought them to our attention, and then what were the things that kept them out of our system. And they were other community agencies, you know, they were relationships with other community agencies. So there's some really good work getting done there. And we're also, I believe, I always get this mixed up, but we're also the sort of the executive body for our system of care, I guess. So that's been, and it's been one of the really unique things I think about this group is being able to have a couple of non-city partners like the regional center. And it's been very helpful. So I'll turn over to Lisa. She can talk to her experience about this.
Okay. You know, again, I think the unique thing around all of these efforts in San Francisco has been inclusion. And I know in some areas of the state, there is not the same kind of working relationship that we are experiencing in San Francisco between city and county and regional center. And the working of this committee, the Strengthening Families and Community Task Force, and all the work that's been done on the MOU and all the work that was done on the continuity of care reform MOU prior to that, has brought not just the city departments closer together, but has really made education and regional center part of this ongoing team, so that when this group got together to discuss what we're going to do for COVID, it was just another natural offspring of the work that most of us had already been doing. So I think if you are, and there's not the same kind of, oh, this is, it goes back to, these are our children. So it's not, if a child is being served and supported by regional center, the county in San Francisco doesn't say, oh, you're fully responsible because there was a regional center. It truly is a shared vision and a shared responsibility, so that if the county is working with a family and a youth who also happen to be served by the regional center, Liz just calls me up and says, we need XYZ help with this placement for this child, and we've been able to work together as a team. And it, the families and the children shouldn't see the work in the background. For them, it should just be, this is what we need. How can you all help us get there? And we work with them to provide that. And in the background, the phone calls happen, and it's working really well.
Before we go to the next slide, and we're just, that's our wrap-up slide. There were a couple questions in this chat. We had a couple questions about basically confidentiality and how we navigated, for example, the multiple teams sharing data, standing orders, ROIs, et cetera. In the MOU itself, we just referenced general agreement to comply with, the confidentiality expectations. We didn't want to make the MOU so detailed that it would not be flexible enough to move forward for a decent period of time. Because if you make it too specific and there are changes, you have to go back and change everything. So it's just general agreement. But with the day-to-day practice, it's really complicated. And Chris, you might want to chime in here too, but it can take a lot of coordination. I'm not going to say it's a smooth process because it's not.
It feels like we don't have a lot of control and influence over some basic decisions around data sharing and confidentiality, because there's the law, there's HIPAA requirements, there's welfare requirements.
Comply with all those.
We have to comply with all of them, and it's frustrating. And we express our mutual frustrations at what limits, I think, good care coordination. But with those frustrations, we still do the best we can, knowing, and it's a grounding principle of ours, knowing that the families are experiencing this too. So we're having to do it from our perspective but protecting information about the families and the children and the youth, that's paramount to what we do. And we want to be sensitive that this is information about their lives. And
Right.
it's frustrating, but it's about them. And I think that helps ground us and reminds us that this is frustrating, but yet it's important to respect it.
With some of the analysis we've done on specific projects, I'll just use WRAP, for example. We get the names of the clients from the provider. We'll run our own analysis on the placement outcomes and generate some aggregated data, and then we'll use that in the report, for example. Similarly on mental health, Richie Rubio will work as needed with our partners to develop aggregated data analysis, and then we can take that and use it in our annual reports.
Yeah. We have a very robust data analysis team between our various departments. Very, very fortunate to have some incredibly smart, skilled people that love doing that. Yeah.
We also had a question asking about if we can share our cheat sheets. Yes, we'd be happy to do that. If our family resource centers offer space for CFT meetings, they let us have meetings there, but sometimes, we have our own offices for CFTs. That's typically where they take place, but our CFT staff, right now it's all on Zoom, but our CFT staff are happy to go wherever it's convenient. They'll do CFTs at hospitals or at schools or other places, including the FRCs if that's convenient for the family. Let's see, I think there was a question for juvenile probation. Gary, this one's for you. How do probation department as well as the placing agencies manage CFT facilitation with an independent individual? Do you utilize another deputy, other party, or facilitators ICPM trained?
Right. So we are going to be creating a pool. We trained 2 or 3 individuals initially to be specific CFT facilitators. They are non-case carriers. So they do the scheduling and the CFT facilitation and the action planning during the CFTs, as opposed to using a case carrying probation officer.
And juvenile probation has been with us at the table, in CFT facilitation trainings. So, they'll piggyback off our work to provide support for their facilitator. We're happy to share information. And likewise, Martha, who's their facilitator, participates in a lot of planning meetings around CFT implementation. So it's a joint effort. I'm gonna turn it over to Chris to do the wrap-up slide.
Yeah, so we like to reflect on things in San Francisco as part of our trauma-informed approach that's now being embraced citywide. All of this having been said, where are we now with things? And it, I think it is about the relationships, and it's important to remind ourselves that the legislation, the mandates, they require things, but the focus is on the children and families, and that's always a win-win. We have the right people around the table to make good policy and procedure decisions for the children and families. GGRC was later to join in the game, but now that they're with us, that enhances everything as well, and so that feels great. And we have reflected on that recently. And I think Joan said this earlier, but the leadership, those that are on this this call right now, and then others that aren't, we really walk the walk and talk the talk. And we think that it's a parallel process to what a CFT is designed to do. It's really focusing on the family. Think about a plan to accomplish goals for the family. And we really value that. Why can't we do the same thing, only from our perspectives, from our level of interacting with the system to help the children and families? And I think we do that fairly successfully. There are fewer territorial issues. We don't retreat to our islands or our silos. And if we do, I think we have relationships that will call each other out if that ever happens. It doesn't happen, but I think if we did out of unconscious reactivity, that it would be called out in a safe way, and that feels really good to have that. And in general, issues, obstacles, they do get worked out over time, and I think as small as San Francisco is, things sometimes move as slow as molasses, and then occasionally as fast as a lightning strike. So it's kind of one extreme or the other. But eventually things do get smoothed over, work out, solutions are found. It ultimately lends to better outcomes for the children and families. And I think that's all I have.
Just one more thank you slide.
Liz, this is Lisa. Just in terms of concrete steps of where we are now, we are going to be looking at how to get all regional center staff in San Francisco trained on both trauma-informed care and on the core practice model.
Great.
That's great, yeah. I do see one more question about if we engage tribal communities as part of our cross-system ICPM. We don't have, like in the county itself, there's not a specific,
right.
I'm not sure the right language, but tribe, there's a very small Native American population in the city, although the disproportionality in our system is significant. But it's like very few kids, like single digits in our system. There's not a specific tribe, but we do engage with the Native American Health Center, and they are one of our partners in our provider advisory board. And on specific initiatives, they're at the table with us.
Yeah.
I don't know, Joan, if you want to say more, Joan or Chris, about that.
Thank you for mentioning that. They are the health center, Native American Health Center. They're also a contractor of our department for mental health services, and so they are always included in our efforts.
And I think there's one more slide that just says thank you on it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for listening and for questions, and we're happy to answer questions offline too. So if you want to reach out to us, I believe in open door. And yeah, we are lucky here in San Francisco, and good luck to all of you.
Do folks have any other questions for us? Or did we miss any questions?
Thank you so much for your time and your dedication and presentation about everything that you've done today. So we will go through and see if there's some more questions. Diana, are you going to help facilitate this piece? Not sure who was the... Okay, so I'll go through and we'll look for some more questions. Number one, will we have access to this recording? And absolutely, they are going to go through the PowerPoint itself is going to go through 508 compliance, and then we'll post the PowerPoint. The recording will be available sometime. I'm actually not sure if we're going to post the recordings. So actually, I'll look to somebody from the System of Care team for that.
Hi there. So we are working towards that. So once we kind of get the green light and move in that direction, then it will be posted on the CHH website most likely as well. We're also exploring other possibilities, YouTube channels. So that is an exploration. That is our ultimate goal. So stay tuned and we'll keep you all posted.
Great. And then if there are additional questions for San Francisco or for the system of care team. We can look at those now. Christine or Diana, did you see any that you wanted to take a peek at? Okay, great. So then as we wrap up, we have a few minutes left. We're going to cover some resources that are available. I'll leave that to you, Christine.
Sure. So this is a page that has a list of resources with clickable links. So you'll see the System of Care web page. On that web page, you can find the MOU guidance, the kind of toolkit. There's also individual system profiles on that web page that kind of highlight like one-pagers that highlight how the systems work and what services are available and how to access those. So those are really great kind of to add to your toolkit, share with your staff and your teammates, and become more kind of familiar with your system partners. You'll also see our previous PowerPoints there. And as I had mentioned, hopefully we're moving towards a space where we can get these recordings up. So we appreciate your guys' patience while we work through all of our accessibility processes and all of that. You'll also see that there'll be links to the ICPM document, research on the child welfare practice model, and the ICPM toolkit. So those links will take you to those resources.
Excellent.
So also, we just wanted to kind of put a shout out for other presenters. It's really beneficial to have our system partners from across the state be able to share their experiences, highlight their practices, highlight the way that they have kind of overcome barriers or creative solutions. So rather than us, pushing information from the top down, which that's definitely beneficial. It's really, really rich when we have you guys be able to share with one another. So we're always looking for people to be able, or your system partner teams or interagency leadership teams to come together and present. We're looking for if you have creative ideas around financial resource management, sharing data, cross-training, or a shared recruitment process, then we would love to be able to hear from you. So you can send us an email at thesystemofcare@dss.ca.gov. Let us know, and we would love to have you present. If not, you might be tapped on. And so we look forward to connecting with you and hearing from you.
Fantastic. So I think we call it a wrap. So our next webinar will be October 7th, and same time, 10 o'clock. We'll send out registration information for you. Diana or Christine, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, just want to say one more time, thank you to San Francisco team for coming and joining and being a presenter today. Appreciate the partnership, and you all are doing a wonderful job there in San Francisco. Thank you, everybody that joined.